Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. Please join me, Dr. Smalktalk, as we once again take a stroll through the dark lands. Tonight's story is another tale of mystery from the Bermuda Triangle, the story of the British South American Airways Corporation and their aircraft, the Star Tiger. The British South American Airways Corporation was formed in 1946, just a year after the end of World War II. It is a long way from England to the bottom of the South American continent. Planes capable of flying great distances were needed, so the company purchased several huge four-engined Avro Tudors. These could carry enough fuel to stay aloft for 16 hours. The men who flew for British South American were all highly experienced. They had all flown against the enemy during the war, and none of them had less than 1,500 hours of flying time. Brian McMillan, the 34-year-old captain of the Star Tiger, had spent well over 3,000 hours piloting planes of various kinds. The Star Tiger was scheduled to leave London Airport on January 27, 1948. There were 5 other crew members besides Captain McMillan: First Officer David Colby, Second Officer Cyril Ellison, who had both been pilots in the Royal Air Force, Robert Tuck, the radio officer, who was reported to be the very best man in the business. The 2 air hostesses, known as Star Girls, were Lynn Clayton and Sheila Nichols. Miss Clayton had survived a terrible plane crash in West Africa only 9 months earlier. One of the most distinguished passengers on the Star Tiger was Major Alexander Sandy Bardwell. During the war, he had been decorated several times for outstanding courage on the field of battle. He was wounded and taken prisoner on the Greek island of Crete. Soon after being liberated, he went to then British-mandated Palestine, now Israel, as a second-in-command of the 1st Argyll Regiment. He got married while home on leave from the Middle East and was taking his new bride to the romantic island of Bermuda for their honeymoon. Bardwell is a well-known name in the lovely, lonely hills and lakes of Argyll, Scotland. It is said in Argyll that the eldest son in a Bardwell family never dies in bed. He always dies a violent death. This has been true for many generations. A number of eldest sons have been killed in battle. The others died of different causes, but all of them died violently. This unfortunate tradition was also to hold true in the case of Major Sandy Bardwell. Conditions on board the Star Tiger between London and Lisbon, Portugal were dreadful. The heating system broke down soon after takeoff and the cold was agonizing. Icicles formed on the roof of the cabin, the inside windows were covered in frost, and it was impossible to see out. The passengers shivered miserably in their seats, but nothing could be done. Lisbon, unfortunately, was warm and sunny. The passengers spent a comfortable night in a hotel and then reported back to the airport at 8 o'clock in the morning. Mechanics had repaired the heating system and take-off was scheduled for 9 o'clock. Captain McMillan, however, was not satisfied with the performance of one of the engines. The mechanics soon found what was wrong. The Star Tiger took off for the Azores a few minutes before noon. McMillan's troubles were far from over. As soon as the aircraft reached a cruising altitude of 21,000 feet, the heating system again broke down. Icicles formed on the ceiling and once more the windows frosted over. The only thing that cheered the passengers was the belief that they would be in sunny Bermuda in the morning. But there were still more problems to come. A gale-force wind was howling across the runway where Captain McMillan landed on the island of Santa Maria in the Azores. This was a matter that required some serious thought. He had planned to take off immediately after refueling. Planes bound for Bermuda always took off from the Azores in the afternoon and flew through the night. The weather report from the meteorological office was far from encouraging. Clouds and strong winds could be expected for the first 1,000 miles. This was the sort of news that the crew didn't want to hear. If the skies were overcast, it would not be possible for the navigator to plot their position by the stars. Bermuda was 2,000 miles away. The strong winds meant more fuel consumption, and that was an added danger. Captain McMillan shook his head sadly. The risk was simply not worth taking. Passengers were told that there would be a 24-hour delay. Their luggage was unloaded and everyone checked in at the airport hotel. The weather was much better the next day. There would be moderate headwinds and some overcast, but this wasn't really serious. McMillan decided that no further delay was necessary. They would take off for Bermuda at 3:30 in the afternoon. But now another problem popped up. With full fuel tanks and 25 passengers on board, the Tudor would be carrying more weight than the safety regulations allowed. This was truly a tough one, and McMillan wasn't sure whether to leave some passengers behind or to reduce his fuel load. He didn't like the idea of leaving 2 or 3 passengers in the Azores. The flight had been very uncomfortable so far, and there had already been 2 delays. He He just couldn't ask anyone to wait there until the next British South American Airways plane arrived from London. Neither did Captain Macmillan like the idea of taking off with a reduced fuel load. It was a long way to Bermuda, and every gallon counted. The headwinds increased fuel consumption, and it would be sheer idiocy to leave without full fuel tanks. It was only on the Azores-Bermuda leg of the flight that the Tudors took off with their tanks full. Although he knew there was a slight risk involved, the pilot asked the traffic assistant to fill his tanks right up to the top. Most of the overweight would be used up while taxiing down the field and in the take-off run, he reasoned. He also rejected the idea of leaving any passenger behind. They were all anxious to see Bermuda, and it was his job to get them there. At 3:30 p.m., January 29, 1948, the Star Tiger left the airport of Santa Maria in the Azores. Her next destination was Bermuda. There was enough fuel in the tanks to keep the Tudor aloft for 16 hours. Captain Macmillan estimated the flying time to Bermuda at just slightly over 12 hours. Unless something unforeseen happened, there would still be plenty of gas left when they landed. The poor passengers were in for a bad time of it. They had been freezing in their seats from London all the way to the Azores, and now it was warm enough, but the plane pitched and bucked like a wild pony. Nobody felt like eating, and quite a few people were violently airsick. Business in the cockpit went on at a brisk and efficient manner. There was no time to relax on this leg of the flight. They were flying at an altitude of only 2,000 feet, and could easily see the storm-tossed Atlantic beneath them. Turbulence became more severe after dark. The strength of the headwinds increased, and so did the discomfort of the passengers. Hardly anyone was able to get any sleep. Although Captain Macmillan knew they would not arrive in Bermuda at the scheduled time, he wasn't worried. The plane was performing well, and there was a promise of better weather ahead. 12 hours after leaving the Azores, the Star Tiger made radio contact with Bermuda. Robert Tuck, the radio officer, asked for a bearing and was told the plane was right on course. Tuck and Macmillan grilled at one another. A series of these bearings would get them safely to the island. The tough part of the flight was over. They were almost home. The ground operator on Bermuda waited for further word from the Star Tiger. It was approaching the island, and it seemed strange that there had been no more requests for bearings. When he tried to make contact with the plane, however, there was no reply. He kept trying, but his calls were not answered. Something had happened to the Star Tiger, and the ground operator raised the alarm 95 minutes after the last contact. British planes and the American search and rescue mission at Kennedy Field were out over the Atlantic at the crack of dawn. One of the aircraft was a flying fortress with a radar scanner. The search was conducted on the area between Bermuda and the point from which Robert Tuck had requested a bearing from Bermuda. The planes were in the air from dawn till dusk. After 5 long days, the search was finally called off. Not a single thing had been found. No wreckage, no oil slick, no survivors, nothing. Nor was anything learned during the course of the investigation that followed. Aeronautical engineers stressed the fact that the Tudors were extremely well-made aircraft. Loss of pilot control was ruled out because either Macmillan, Colby or Allison could have brought the plane into Bermuda. Radio failure also seemed improbable. The Star Tiger carried the best radio aids available. It was highly unlikely that these could have failed. There was one question, though, that couldn't be answered. If the plane had been in trouble, why hadn't the radio officer sent out a distress signal? Robert Tuck was a skilled and experienced operator. If he had so much as touched the transmit key, some station would surely have heard him. Why then hadn't he done so? Had the plane been destroyed so quickly that there hadn't even been time enough for that? There were questions that the investigators couldn't answer, nor could anyone else. Nobody knew what had happened to the Star Tiger, but many believed that she had been destroyed or swallowed up by some mysterious and unknown force. The disappearance of the British South American Airways plane added to one more chapter in the book of Bardwell tragedies, and another to the tragedies of the Bermuda Triangle. Thank you for listening to tonight's episode of Tales from the Darklands. Hope you've enjoyed it. Please join us again next week as we take another stroll through the Darklands. Thank you, and good night.